Introduction. Most people think of sleep as a shutdown process. You close your eyes. You lose awareness. Hours pass. Then you wake up. From the outside, that's exactly what it looks like. But the strange thing is that your brain doesn't experience sleep the way you think it does. Your conscious attention disappears for a while, but the systems that keep you alive, protect you, and help you function the next day never stop working. That's important because it changes the way you think about yourself. A lot of people unknowingly carry around a machine-like view of the mind. They assume they are either on or off, working or resting, focused or inactive. The reality is much more interesting. Even while you're asleep, your brain is making decisions. It's filtering information. It's monitoring your environment. It's regulating your body. It's organizing memories. It's solving problems. And in some cases, it's preparing you for challenges you haven't even encountered yet. When you understand this, you stop seeing sleep as empty time. You start seeing it as one of the most active periods of your entire day. The reason this matters goes beyond neuroscience. It explains something many people feel but struggle to articulate. Have you ever gone to bed stuck on a problem and woken up with a clearer answer? Have you ever noticed that an emotional situation feels overwhelming at night, but manageable the next morning? Have you ever wondered why one bad night of sleep can make everything feel harder, heavier, and more frustrating? That's not an accident. That's your brain doing, or failing to do, its nightly work. Most people only pay attention to their minds when they're awake. They focus on productivity, learning, concentration, creativity, and decision-making. But those abilities don't begin when you wake up. They begin the night before. The quality of your thinking tomorrow depends heavily on what your brain is able to accomplish tonight. And here's where things get even more interesting. Your brain doesn't simply remain active during sleep. It remains selective. It doesn't pay attention to everything. It pays attention to what matters. Think about how you can sleep through the hum of a fan for years. The sound is there. Your ears hear it. The signal reaches your brain. Yet you stay asleep. Then one night, a door opens unexpectedly in another room. The sound is quieter than the fan, but suddenly you're awake. Why? Because your brain isn't measuring importance by volume. It's measuring importance by relevance. Even while you're asleep, some part of your mind is still asking a simple question. Does this matter? Most of the time, the answer is no. So you stay asleep. But if the answer changes, your brain is capable of bringing you back to full awareness within seconds. That's an incredible system when you stop and think about it. Your conscious self disappears for hours every night. Yet something remains on duty. Something continues monitoring. Something continues managing. Something continues protecting. And perhaps the biggest misunderstanding people have about sleep is assuming that rest means inactivity. Real recovery doesn't happen because your brain stops working. Real recovery happens because your brain starts working on different things. During the day, your attention is directed outward. You answer messages. You solve problems. You make decisions. You react to people. You navigate responsibilities. Your mental energy gets pulled in dozens of directions. At night, much of that external demand disappears. The brain finally gets uninterrupted time to handle the backlog. Imagine never cleaning your house because you're constantly hosting guests. Eventually, clutter starts piling up everywhere. That's similar to what happens mentally. Every day creates information, experiences, emotions, and decisions that need to be processed. Sleep is when much of that processing finally happens. Your brain gets the opportunity to organize, prioritize, archive, repair, and prepare. Not because you're conscious, but because you're not. This creates a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of viewing sleep as the absence of activity, you can begin viewing it as invisible work. Work that affects your mood, your memory, your focus, your emotional stability, your creativity, your health, and your ability to handle life effectively. The truth is that while you sleep, a version of you is still working. Not the version that answers emails. Not the version that worries about deadlines. Not the version that scrolls through information. A deeper version. A more fundamental version. The collection of systems that quietly keep your life functioning. Most people never think about that. They only notice the results. They notice feeling sharp after a good night's sleep. They notice feeling exhausted after a bad one. They notice that some mornings everything feels manageable, while other mornings even simple tasks feel difficult. But the cause is often hidden. The cause is what happened while they were unconscious. And once you understand that, sleep stops looking like wasted time. It starts looking like one of the most important investments you make every single day. What actually happens when you fall asleep? When you think about falling asleep, it probably feels like a single event. You're awake, then you're asleep. Simple. But that's not what actually happens. Sleep is a transition, not a switch. Your brain doesn't suddenly power down. It gradually changes priorities. This is one of the reasons many people misunderstand sleep entirely. They're looking for an off button that doesn't exist. What actually exists is a series of shifts. Imagine leaving a busy office building at the end of the day. Employees begin leaving. Phones stop ringing. Meetings end. The lights turn off in certain rooms. But the building itself doesn't stop functioning. Security systems activate. Maintenance crews begin working. Servers keep running. Essential operations continue. Your brain works in a similar way. When you begin falling asleep, the parts of your mind responsible for conscious attention start stepping back. The external world becomes less important. Your internal systems become more important. This process starts before you even realize it. Think about the last time you were extremely tired. You may have noticed your thoughts becoming less organized. Your focus became harder to maintain. You started drifting. Maybe you reread the same sentence multiple times. Maybe you stopped paying attention to a conversation. Maybe your mind started generating random images and disconnected thoughts. Those aren't signs that your brain is shutting down. They're signs that your brain is changing modes. The systems responsible for sustained attention are gradually reducing activity. The systems responsible for sleep are gradually taking over. This transition happens every single night, whether you notice it or not. And it reveals something important. Your conscious awareness is only one small part of what your brain does. Most people identify completely with their conscious mind. They assume that if they aren't actively thinking about something, nothing is happening. But your brain is running thousands of processes outside conscious awareness every moment of the day. Sleep simply makes that reality easier to see. Once you fall asleep, your brain begins moving through different stages. These stages aren't random. Each one serves a purpose, and each one contributes to your ability to function the next day. One stage focuses heavily on physical recovery. Another supports memory processing. Another is associated with vivid dreaming. Another helps regulate emotional stability. The details can get technical, but the bigger lesson is simple. Sleep isn't one activity. Sleep is a collection of coordinated activities. That's why 8 hours of sleep isn't automatically 8 hours of recovery. The quality of those sleep stages matters. Your brain is trying to accomplish specific tasks. If those tasks are constantly interrupted, the benefits decrease. This helps explain something many people experience. Have you ever slept for a long time but still felt exhausted? At first glance, that doesn't make sense. If sleep were simply about being unconscious, more hours should always equal more recovery. But sleep isn't measured only by time. It's measured by what your brain successfully accomplishes during that time. You can spend 8 hours in bed while your sleep remains fragmented. You can spend 8 hours moving in and out of different stages without completing the processes your brain is trying to perform. The result is waking up feeling like you never fully recovered. On the other hand, you've probably had mornings where you slept fewer hours but woke up surprisingly refreshed. Again, this points to the same truth. Your brain isn't looking for unconsciousness. It's looking for effective maintenance time. And that maintenance extends far beyond physical recovery. One of the biggest misconceptions about sleep is that rest is primarily for the body. In reality, your brain may be one of the biggest beneficiaries. Every waking moment creates information, conversations, experiences, problems, emotions, observations, decisions. Your brain collects all of it. The challenge is that life doesn't stop to let you process everything immediately. You move from one task to another, one conversation to another, one responsibility to another. Information accumulates faster than it can be organized. Sleep gives your brain the opportunity to start dealing with that accumulation. It's almost like the difference between a cluttered desk and a clean one. When papers, notes, and documents pile up everywhere, finding what you need becomes harder. When everything has been sorted and organized, thinking becomes easier. Your brain faces a similar challenge. Without proper sleep, information remains mentally disorganized. With proper sleep, much of that information gets sorted into useful structures. This is one reason sleep affects clarity so dramatically. People often assume clarity comes from trying harder. Sometimes clarity comes from sleeping better. You don't always need more effort. Sometimes you need more processing. And that's exactly what your brain is doing while you sleep. Not shutting down, not disappearing, not becoming inactive. It's simply shifting from outward performance to inward maintenance. The outside world becomes quieter. The internal work becomes louder. An understanding that changes the way you see sleep itself. Instead of viewing sleep as empty time between productive days, you begin recognizing it as part of the productive process itself. The work may be invisible, but the results show up everywhere in your life. In your mood, in your focus, in your patience, in your learning, in your creativity, and in your ability to think clearly when it matters most. The person you become tomorrow is influenced by the work your brain completes tonight. That's why what happens after you fall asleep matters far more than most people realize. Your brain never stops listening. One of the strangest things about sleep is that you can be completely unaware of the world around you while your brain continues paying attention to it. At first, that sounds impossible. If you're asleep, shouldn't you be disconnected from everything happening outside your mind? Not exactly. Your conscious awareness disconnects from most of the environment, but your brain doesn't stop monitoring it. This distinction matters because it helps explain many experiences you've probably had throughout your life. Think about a normal night of sleep. Maybe there's traffic outside. Maybe an air conditioner is running. Maybe a fan is spinning in the corner of the room. These sounds continue for hours. Your ears are still receiving them. The sound waves are still entering your auditory system. The information is still reaching your brain, yet you remain asleep. Now imagine a different situation. It's 3 in the morning. You hear a loud crash somewhere in the house. You wake up almost instantly. What changed? Your ears were receiving information in both situations. The difference wasn't the existence of sound. The difference was how your brain evaluated the sound. This reveals something fascinating. Your sleeping brain isn't simply receiving information. It's filtering information. And filtering is one of the most important jobs your brain performs. If your brain reacted equally to every sound, every movement, and every piece of sensory information, you would never stay asleep. The smallest disturbance would wake you. A passing car, a creaking floorboard, the sound of wind outside, a shifting blanket. Sleep would become almost impossible. So your brain developed a much smarter system. Instead of responding to everything, it responds selectively. It asks a simple question over and over again. Does this matter? Most of the time, the answer is no. The fan is familiar. The traffic is predictable. The rain on the roof isn't dangerous. The information gets filtered out. You remain asleep. But when something unusual happens, the calculation changes. A sudden noise, an unfamiliar voice, the sound of glass breaking, a baby crying, a smoke alarm. These signals are treated differently. Your brain recognizes that they may require attention, and attention is exactly what it prepares to give. This selective awareness explains something many people have experienced. Imagine sleeping in a room where multiple people are talking. You remain asleep. Then someone says your name. Suddenly, you become partially aware. Maybe you wake up. Maybe you don't fully wake, but your attention shifts. This happens because your brain assigns importance to certain information. Your name carries meaning. It has been associated with your identity for your entire life. The brain learns that certain signals deserve special treatment. This isn't magic. It's pattern recognition, and your brain is extraordinarily good at it. In fact, much of your daily life depends on this ability. When you're awake, your brain constantly filters information too. Right now, you're probably ignoring dozens of sensations. The feeling of your clothing, the pressure of your chair, background sounds, minor visual details. Your brain filters these so you can focus. Sleep uses a similar principle. The difference is that the filter becomes much more aggressive. Only information that crosses a certain threshold receives attention. Everything else stays in the background. This is where many people misunderstand what alert means. When researchers say the brain remains alert during sleep, they don't mean you're consciously aware of everything. They mean your brain continues evaluating information. The monitoring system remains active. Think about a security guard watching surveillance cameras. The guard isn't investigating every single movement. That would be exhausting. Instead, they're looking for unusual activity. Most events are ignored. Certain events trigger a response. Your brain operates similarly throughout the night. And this serves an important purpose. Humans evolved in environments where complete disconnection would have been dangerous. For most of history, people slept without locked doors, alarm systems, electric lighting, or modern protection. The ability to detect meaningful threats while sleeping increased the chances of survival. The people whose brains remained appropriately responsive had an advantage. That protective system still exists today. You can see evidence of it everywhere. Parents often become remarkably sensitive to the sounds of their children. A parent may sleep through thunderstorms, traffic, or television noise, but a small cry from another room immediately grabs attention. The sound itself isn't necessarily louder. It's simply more important. The brain has learned that this specific signal deserves priority. The same principle applies in countless situations. A person living near train tracks may eventually sleep through trains. Someone living in a busy city may barely notice sirens. Repeated exposure teaches the brain that certain sounds are normal. Normal sounds stop demanding attention. Unexpected sounds continue to matter. This teaches us something broader about the mind. Your brain is not designed to notice everything. It's designed to notice what matters. That principle doesn't only apply during sleep. It applies throughout life. Your attention is always limited. Your brain is always deciding what deserves resources. The challenge is that modern life floods you with more information than your brain evolved to handle. Notifications, messages, news, entertainment, advertisements, opinions, alerts. Everything competes for attention. And because attention is limited, your brain must constantly filter. The same system that protects your sleep helps protect your focus. The problem is that many people never intentionally manage what they're feeding into that system. They expose themselves to endless stimulation and then wonder why their minds feel overwhelmed. Your brain is trying to determine what matters. But when everything is presented as urgent, the filtering process becomes more difficult. This is one reason quality sleep can become harder in modern life. The brain doesn't instantly switch from constant stimulation to complete relaxation. It carries momentum. If your mind spends every waking hour reacting, consuming, and processing information, it may struggle to transition into the quieter mode sleep requires. Understanding this creates a useful perspective shift. Sleep isn't merely something that happens to you. It's something your brain actively manages. Even while you're unconscious, your brain is evaluating information, filtering noise, monitoring for significance, and deciding whether the outside world deserves your attention. Most of the time, it makes those decisions so effectively that you never notice. You simply wake up the next morning assuming nothing happened. But something was happening. Your brain was listening, not to everything, just to what mattered. The brain's night security system. If your brain is still listening while you sleep, the next question is obvious. Why? Why didn't evolution simply create a system that completely disconnected from the outside world for 8 hours every night? Wouldn't that allow for deeper rest? Wouldn't it be more efficient? At first glance, it seems like it would. But there's a problem. A sleeping human is vulnerable. And vulnerability has always carried risks. For most of human history, sleep wasn't happening inside secure homes with locks, alarms, and controlled environments. People slept in conditions where danger could appear unexpectedly. Predators, weather, fire, strangers, environmental changes. The individuals who could completely disconnect from reality while sleeping faced a serious disadvantage. The individuals whose brains maintained a small level of environmental awareness had a better chance of surviving. Over thousands of generations, that advantage became part of how the human brain operates. This is why it's useful to think of sleep not as a shutdown process, but as a balance between recovery and protection. Your brain is trying to accomplish two goals at the same time. Recover efficiently. Stay safe. Neither goal can completely dominate the other. If your brain focused only on protection, you would wake up constantly. Recovery would suffer. If your brain focused only on recovery, important threats could go unnoticed. Safety would suffer. The solution is a middle ground. A system that stays partially aware while allowing deep rest. That's exactly what your brain does every night. Think about how a modern security system works. A security system doesn't actively respond to every event. It monitors. It waits. It looks for patterns that indicate something requires attention. Most of the time, nothing happens. The system remains quiet. But if certain conditions are met, it immediately changes state. An alert is triggered. Your sleeping brain functions in a surprisingly similar way. Most incoming information never becomes important enough to wake you, but your brain remains prepared. It continuously evaluates whether a situation requires action. This process happens automatically. You don't consciously participate. You don't decide whether a sound is important. Your brain makes that judgment long before conscious awareness enters the picture. In many ways, this reveals how much trust you already place in systems you don't control. Every night you surrender consciousness, yet breathing continues. Your heart continues beating. Your body continues regulating itself, and your brain continues protecting you. The remarkable thing is how rarely people think about this. We often assume conscious effort is responsible for everything important. But some of the most critical functions in your life operate without conscious involvement at all. Sleep makes that reality impossible to ignore. Consider how quickly your brain can move from deep sleep to full alertness. If an alarm goes off, you don't spend 30 minutes slowly realizing something is happening. The transition can occur within seconds. One moment you're asleep, the next you're awake and orienting yourself to the situation. That speed exists because the monitoring system never completely stopped operating. It was already paying attention. It simply determined that the information had crossed a threshold requiring action. This helps explain another common experience. Sometimes people wake up moments before their alarm sounds. Many assume this is coincidence. But your brain is often tracking patterns more effectively than you realize. Your internal systems are constantly monitoring time, light exposure, routines, and biological rhythms. The brain doesn't always need an external signal to begin preparing for wakefulness. In some cases, it starts the process itself. Again, this points toward a larger truth. Your brain is not passive during sleep. It is actively managing complex systems behind the scenes. And perhaps the most interesting part is that these protective mechanisms don't disappear when you wake up. They continue influencing your behavior throughout the day. The same brain that monitors for danger during sleep is also monitoring for potential threats while you're awake. This is one reason humans are naturally sensitive to uncertainty. Your brain evolved to prioritize survival before comfort, before convenience, before happiness. Safety comes first. The brain would rather falsely identify a harmless situation as dangerous than fail to notice a real threat. From a survival perspective, that's a sensible trade-off. The problem is that modern environments often trigger ancient systems. A difficult email, an upcoming presentation, financial uncertainty, social rejection. These aren't physical threats, but your brain can still interpret them as problems requiring attention. The result is stress. And stress doesn't only affect your waking hours. It often follows you into sleep. This creates an important connection between daytime life and nighttime recovery. Many people treat sleep problems as isolated events. They focus only on what happens at bedtime. But sleep is often influenced by what happened throughout the day. If your brain spends 16 hours operating in a state of constant alertness, it may struggle to fully relax when night arrives. The security system remains active. The monitoring continues. The threat detection circuits remain engaged. This doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The challenge is that the modern world provides an endless supply of perceived threats. Deadlines, notifications, news cycles, social comparison, uncertainty about the future. The brain wasn't designed to process an infinite stream of potential concerns. Yet many people expose themselves to exactly that. Then they wonder why rest feels difficult. Understanding this can be surprisingly freeing. It shifts the conversation away from blame. Instead of thinking, "Why can't I relax?" you start asking a better question. What signals am I giving my brain? Because your brain responds to patterns. If every day communicates urgency, pressure, and constant stimulation, your nervous system adapts accordingly. If your environment communicates safety, predictability, and stability, your brain responds differently. This doesn't eliminate the need for a nighttime security system. That system will always exist, nor should it disappear. It's one of the reasons you're here. It's one of the reasons your ancestors survived. The goal isn't to eliminate alertness. The goal is to help your brain accurately distinguish between genuine threats and unnecessary noise. And that's a skill that affects far more than sleep. It affects how you experience your entire life. Because the quality of your attention depends heavily on what your brain believes deserves protection. Every night, while you sleep, that ancient security system remains quietly at work, watching, filtering, monitoring, ready to act if necessary, not because it wants to interrupt your rest, but because protecting you has always been part of the job. The hidden control center running your body, while your brain is listening to the world and monitoring for potential threats, it's also doing something even more impressive. It's keeping you alive. That sounds obvious until you stop and think about what that actually means. Right now, while you're awake, it's easy to assume you're in control. You're making decisions. You're directing your attention. You're choosing what to do next. It feels like you're running the operation. But the truth is that most of the important work happening inside your body has never required your permission. You don't consciously tell your heart to beat. You don't manually control your digestion. You don't calculate the exact amount of oxygen your body needs every second. You don't monitor the chemical balance of your bloodstream. You don't regulate your body temperature moment by moment. These systems operate continuously in the background, and sleep makes that reality easier to appreciate. Because when consciousness disappears, those systems don't pause. In many ways, they become even more visible. Imagine running a company with thousands of employees. During the day, all your attention is focused on customer-facing work, meetings, sales, communication, projects, deadlines. But behind the scenes, there are departments handling payroll, security, maintenance, logistics, accounting, and operations. Most customers never see those departments. Yet without them, the entire company would collapse. Your body works similarly. Conscious awareness is only the visible part of the operation. The deeper systems are what make everything possible. Sleep reveals just how dependent you are on them. Take breathing as an example. Most people rarely think about it. You can control your breathing temporarily if you choose. You can take a deep breath. You can hold your breath. You can slow it down. But eventually your automatic systems take over again. And that's a good thing. Imagine if breathing required conscious attention 24 hours a day. You wouldn't survive your first night of sleep. The same principle applies to countless other functions. Your heart continuously adjusts its rhythm. Your blood pressure shifts based on your body's needs. Hormones are released at specific times. Cells repair damage. Energy is allocated. Resources are distributed. The body is constantly making adjustments, all without your awareness. This should create a certain level of humility. Many people live with the assumption that conscious effort is responsible for everything. But some of the most important processes in your life happen entirely outside conscious control. Your body is not waiting for instructions. It is actively managing itself. Sleep is one of the clearest demonstrations of that fact. And perhaps the most interesting part is that these systems don't merely maintain the status quo. They actively prepare you for the future. While you're asleep, your body isn't just preserving itself. It's recovering, repairing, adapting, getting ready for tomorrow. Think about physical exercise. When you work out, most people assume improvement happens during the workout itself. But that's only partially true. The workout creates stress. The adaptation happens afterward. Recovery is where much of the progress occurs. Without recovery, stress simply accumulates. The same principle applies to many aspects of life. Effort creates demands. Recovery creates growth. Sleep is one of the primary environments where that recovery takes place. This helps explain why exhaustion feels so different from simple tiredness. Tiredness often disappears after rest. Exhaustion is usually the result of accumulated demands that have exceeded your recovery capacity. The body has limits. The brain has limits. The nervous system has limits. Ignoring those limits doesn't make them disappear. It simply delays the consequences. Modern culture often encourages people to view rest as optional. Sleep becomes something people sacrifice in exchange for productivity. More work, more output, more achievement. At first, this can appear effective. You gain extra hours. You get more done. You feel ahead. But eventually the hidden costs begin appearing. Focus declines. Decision quality decreases. Patience becomes harder to maintain. Emotional reactions become stronger. Creativity weakens. Simple tasks require more effort. The reason is straightforward. The systems responsible for maintaining performance have been deprived of the time they need to operate effectively. Imagine never servicing a vehicle because stopping feels inefficient. At first, everything seems fine. The vehicle continues moving. The problem is that maintenance isn't optional. Ignoring maintenance doesn't eliminate the need for it. It only increases the likelihood of future problems. Your body operates under similar principles. Sleep is maintenance, not because you're inactive, but because your internal systems finally have the opportunity to perform essential work. And one of the most important forms of maintenance involves energy management. Most people think about energy emotionally. They say they feel energized, or drained, or exhausted, but underneath those feelings are real biological processes. Your brain is one of the most energy-demanding organs in your body. It consumes enormous resources. Every thought, decision, memory, and action requires energy. Sleep helps regulate how those resources are managed. Without sufficient recovery, the system becomes less efficient. This is why poor sleep often affects judgment before people even realize it. The decline isn't always dramatic. It's subtle. A little less focus, a little more frustration, a little more impulsiveness, a little less patience. The changes accumulate, and because they happen gradually, many people adapt to them without noticing. They assume feeling mentally foggy is normal. They assume constant fatigue is normal. They assume struggling to concentrate is normal. Sometimes the problem isn't a lack of effort. Sometimes the problem is that the control center hasn't had enough time to do its job. This perspective changes how you think about performance. High performance isn't simply about pushing harder. It's about supporting the systems that make performance possible. A professional athlete understands this. Training matters. Recovery matters too. A creative professional understands this. Creating matters. Recovery matters too. A business owner understands this. Execution matters. Recovery matters too. The pattern appears everywhere. Systems perform best when maintenance is respected. The human body is no exception. And every night, while you sleep, an extraordinary amount of maintenance is taking place. Your awareness may be gone. Your attention may be absent. But the work continues. The control center remains active. Monitoring, adjusting, balancing, repairing, preparing, doing thousands of jobs you'll never consciously witness. Most mornings, you wake up and simply continue your day. You notice the results without seeing the process. You feel more capable, more focused, more stable, more clear. And it's easy to assume those improvements appeared automatically. They didn't. They were earned by the invisible work your body and brain completed while you were asleep. The better you understand that invisible work, the harder it becomes to see sleep as wasted time. It starts looking more like one of the most important forms of preparation you have. What your brain is doing with your memories. One of the biggest misconceptions about memory is that people treat it like a storage container. You experience something. The brain records it. The information gets stored. Simple. But memory doesn't work that way. Your brain isn't a hard drive. It's not trying to keep a perfect copy of everything that happens to you. If it did, you would be overwhelmed by information almost immediately. Instead, your brain is constantly making decisions. What should be kept? What should be strengthened? What should be connected to existing knowledge? What should be discarded? And some of the most important decisions happen while you're asleep. This is where sleep starts becoming even more fascinating. Because the brain isn't only recovering, it's organizing. Imagine spending an entire day throwing papers onto a desk. Notes, receipts, documents, ideas, messages, photos, books, random information. Hour after hour, the pile grows. Eventually, finding anything becomes difficult. Now imagine having a dedicated period every night where someone comes in, sorts everything, creates folders, removes unnecessary clutter, and organizes the information into useful categories. That's much closer to how memory actually works. Your waking life generates raw material. Sleep helps organize it. This explains something most people have experienced. Have you ever studied something, struggled to understand it, gone to sleep, and then found it easier the next day? At first, it feels strange. You weren't actively studying while asleep. You weren't consciously thinking about the material. Yet something changed. The reason is that your brain continued working with the information after your conscious attention disappeared. Learning doesn't end when you stop studying. In many ways, learning continues after you fall asleep. This has implications far beyond school. Every conversation you have, every skill you practice, every challenge you face, every experience you encounter, your brain is collecting information from all of it. The question isn't whether information enters the system. The question is whether the information becomes useful. And usefulness often depends on organization. Think about the difference between owning a library and being able to find the right book. A library filled with random piles of books isn't very useful. Organization is what transforms information into something valuable. Your brain faces the same challenge. Knowledge alone isn't enough. Information must be structured in a way that allows it to be accessed when needed. Sleep appears to play an important role in that process. The brain strengthens certain connections, weakens others, builds associations, creates patterns, finds relationships between ideas. This is one reason insight often arrives unexpectedly. People assume insights appear out of nowhere, but many insights are the result of hidden processing. The brain continues working beneath conscious awareness. Then eventually the answer becomes visible. You might have experienced this with a difficult problem. You think about it for hours. Nothing works. The harder you push, the more stuck you become. Then you step away. You sleep. The next morning the solution feels obvious. What happened? The answer didn't magically appear. Your brain continued processing information while you were no longer actively interfering with the process. Sometimes conscious effort is useful. Sometimes stepping away is useful. The challenge is knowing the difference. Modern culture often overemphasizes conscious effort. We're taught to think harder, work longer, push further, stay engaged. And certainly there are situations where effort matters. But effort isn't the only ingredient in effective thinking. Processing matters too. Integration matters too. Recovery matters too. The sleeping brain is often doing work that conscious attention cannot easily accomplish. This becomes especially important in creative work. Many people assume creativity is purely about generating ideas. In reality, creativity often involves connecting existing ideas in new ways. The more experiences, concepts, and information your brain can organize effectively, the more opportunities it has to create useful connections. Sleep appears to support that process. This is one reason creative breakthroughs frequently arrive after periods of rest. The brain has had time to reorganize information. Relationships become clearer. Patterns become easier to see. Connections emerge. What looked unrelated before suddenly makes sense. And it's not only ideas that get processed. Experiences do too. Every day generates emotional information. Conversations, successes, failures, conflicts, disappointments, moments of uncertainty, moments of excitement. The brain must process these experiences as well. Otherwise, they simply accumulate. Think about how different a situation can feel after a good night's sleep. A problem that felt overwhelming at midnight often feels more manageable in the morning. The circumstances may be identical. Nothing external changed. Yet your relationship to the problem changed. Part of that shift comes from the processing that occurred overnight. The brain had an opportunity to work with the experience, to place it in context, to reduce some of the emotional intensity, to integrate it into a larger picture. This doesn't mean sleep solves every problem, but it often improves your ability to approach problems effectively. And that's an important distinction. Many people spend years trying to think their way out of every challenge. Sometimes the better approach is to create conditions that allow the brain to process naturally, because not every problem is solved through more effort. Some problems are solved through better integration. This perspective changes the way you think about learning. It changes the way you think about productivity, and it changes the way you think about sleep itself. Sleep is not the absence of learning. It's part of learning. Sleep is not the absence of thinking. It's part of thinking. Sleep is not the absence of growth. It's part of growth. The visible work happens while you're awake. The invisible work often happens while you're asleep. And both are necessary. Without experience, there is nothing to process. Without processing, experience struggles to become wisdom. This is why memory is far more than remembering facts. Memory helps create understanding. It helps create judgment. It helps create intuition. It helps create the ability to recognize patterns and make better decisions. Every night, your brain is working with the raw material of your life, sorting, connecting, strengthening, refining, transforming scattered experiences into something more useful. Most of the time, you never notice the process. You only notice the result. A clearer thought, a better idea, a stronger memory, a deeper understanding, a problem that suddenly makes sense. What feels like a moment of insight is often the final visible stage of work that began long before you woke up. Why dreams feel so real? At some point while learning about sleep, almost everyone asks the same question. If the brain is organizing memories, monitoring the environment, regulating the body, and performing all of these hidden tasks, then where do dreams fit into the picture? Because dreams are strange. Sometimes they're entertaining. Sometimes they're confusing. Sometimes they're emotional. Sometimes they're so realistic that you wake up needing a few seconds to remember what actually happened. And that's what makes them fascinating. Even though you know a dream isn't real, while you're experiencing it, it often feels completely convincing. You don't stop in the middle of a dream and think, this doesn't make any sense. You accept impossible situations. You accept strange events. You accept people appearing out of nowhere. You accept places changing instantly. For the duration of the dream, your brain treats the experience as reality. Why? The answer starts with understanding something important. Sleep is not a state of uniform brain activity. Different systems become more active or less active depending on the stage of sleep. During certain periods, the brain becomes remarkably active. Not active in the same way it is during focused work, but active enough that entire experiences can be generated internally. Think about what happens when you're awake. Your brain is constantly building a model of reality. You aren't experiencing the world directly. You're experiencing your brain's interpretation of incoming information. Your eyes collect light. Your ears collect sound. Your senses gather information. Then your brain assembles it into a coherent experience. Dreaming uses some of the same machinery. The difference is that the information comes primarily from inside rather than outside. Instead of building an experience from the physical environment, the brain begins building experiences from memories, emotions, associations, expectations, and stored information. The result is what you recognize as a dream. This helps explain why dreams often contain familiar elements. People you've met, places you've visited, conversations you've had, concerns you've been thinking about. Even when a dream feels completely bizarre, it is usually constructed from pieces that already exist somewhere in your experience. Your brain is not creating from nothing. It's reorganizing existing material. In some ways, dreams resemble the memory processing we discussed earlier. Information gets mixed together. Connections form. Fragments combine. The difference is that instead of producing organized thoughts, the process often produces vivid experiences. And because those experiences feel real, they capture our attention. This reveals something important about the mind. Reality is not simply what happens around you. Reality is what your brain believes is happening. While you're awake, external information helps keep that model accurate. While you're dreaming, those external anchors become weaker. The brain continues generating experiences, but now it has much greater freedom. That's why impossible things can feel completely normal inside a dream. The systems responsible for questioning and evaluating reality are not operating in the same way they do during wakefulness. As a result, your brain accepts situations that would immediately seem absurd during the day. You might suddenly be back in school. You might be talking to someone you haven't seen in years. You might be in a place that combines pieces of multiple locations from your life. And none of it feels unusual until you wake up. Then suddenly you recognize how strange it was. This difference between dreaming and waking offers a useful lesson. It reminds us that certainty is often more fragile than we think. The feeling that something is real and the fact that something is real are not always the same thing. Your brain is capable of creating powerful experiences from internally generated information alone. That realization can be humbling. It demonstrates how much of your experience depends on interpretation. But dreams are not only interesting because they feel real. They're interesting because they often reveal what has your attention. Not always in a direct way, and not always in a way that can be neatly interpreted. People often make the mistake of treating dreams like secret messages that need decoding. In reality, dreams are usually messier than that. They are not necessarily delivering profound truths, but they often reflect what your brain has been working with. Concerns, goals, fears, memories, relationships, unfinished experiences. If you've been intensely focused on a project, it may appear in your dreams. If you're worried about something, elements of that concern may appear. If you've had a meaningful conversation, your brain may continue working with aspects of it during sleep. This doesn't mean every dream has deep meaning. Sometimes the brain is simply processing information in ways that create unusual experiences. The important point is that dreaming is another sign that the sleeping brain is active, not passive, not disconnected, active. even while your body remains still. Even while consciousness as you normally know it is absent, the mind continues generating experiences. And this activity helps explain why sleep feels different from unconsciousness. If someone loses consciousness due to anesthesia, for example, they generally don't report long streams of experiences. Sleep is different. Sleep contains entire worlds, entire stories, entire emotional experiences. Hours can seem to pass inside a dream, and all of it emerges from the activity of the brain. This is one reason dreams continue to fascinate people. They provide evidence that your inner world remains active even when your outer world fades into the background. The brain doesn't stop creating. It doesn't stop processing. It doesn't stop working. It simply shifts the source material. Instead of drawing primarily from the environment, it begins drawing from within. And perhaps the most useful takeaway isn't what dreams mean. It's what dreams demonstrate. They demonstrate that sleep is far more active than it appears. They demonstrate that the brain remains capable of generating complex experiences while you're unconscious. They demonstrate that much of what shapes your mental life happens outside direct awareness. Every night, your mind continues operating in ways you rarely witness firsthand. Dreams are one of the few visible clues that this hidden activity is taking place. They're not proof that the brain has stopped working. They're proof that it never really did. Why you wake up at the exact wrong time? Most people don't judge sleep by what happens during the night. They judge it by how they feel in the morning. You can tell someone they spent 8 hours asleep, but if they wake up feeling exhausted, they won't care much about the number. What they care about is the result. Do they feel clear, focused, energetic, ready to function? Or do they feel like they were dragged out of sleep against their will? Almost everyone has experienced both. And that's where sleep becomes confusing. Because sometimes you sleep for a long time and wake up tired. Other times you sleep less and feel surprisingly refreshed. At first glance, this seems inconsistent. Shouldn't more sleep always produce better results? Not necessarily. Because sleep isn't simply about duration. It's also about timing. To understand why, it helps to remember something we've discussed throughout this article. Sleep is not one continuous state. Your brain moves through different stages throughout the night. These stages repeat in cycles. You aren't sleeping in exactly the same way from bedtime until morning. Your brain is constantly shifting between different modes of activity. Some stages involve deeper physical recovery. Some involve more memory processing. Some involve more dreaming. Your position within these cycles can dramatically affect how you feel when you wake up. Imagine being interrupted in the middle of an important task. Perhaps you're deeply focused on a project. Someone suddenly pulls you away before you've finished. You would probably feel disoriented, mentally unfinished, not fully transitioned. Something similar can happen when waking from certain stages of sleep. Your brain may still be deeply engaged in processes it hasn't completed. Then an alarm forces an abrupt transition into wakefulness. The result is that heavy, foggy feeling many people know well. This experience is often mistaken for lack of sleep. Sometimes the issue isn't quantity. Sometimes it's timing. You woke up during a phase where your brain was not ready to become fully alert. As a result, part of the sleep process lingers into wakefulness. This is why some mornings feel harder than others, even when the number of hours appears identical. The quality of the transition matters. Your brain doesn't instantly switch from sleep mode to peak performance mode. It needs time to reorient itself, to reconnect with the environment, to rebuild conscious awareness, to restore full cognitive function. Usually this process happens quickly, but not always. And when it doesn't, people often experience what feels like mental friction. Simple tasks require more effort. Thoughts move more slowly. Concentration feels difficult. Motivation feels lower. The challenge is that many people interpret these feelings incorrectly. They assume something is wrong with them. They assume they're lazy, undisciplined, unmotivated. In reality, they may simply be experiencing the lingering effects of an interrupted sleep cycle. This is important because it changes the conversation from self-judgment to understanding. You can make better decisions when you understand what's happening. And one of the most useful things to understand is that your brain follows rhythms. Not just during sleep. Throughout the entire day, there are periods when alertness naturally rises, periods when energy naturally falls, periods when focus becomes easier, periods when recovery becomes more important. The modern world often encourages people to ignore these rhythms, work longer, push through fatigue, consume more stimulation, stay productive at all costs. The problem is that biological systems don't negotiate with slogans. Your brain still operates according to underlying patterns. You can ignore those patterns temporarily, but eventually the costs appear, and those costs often become visible during sleep. This helps explain why consistency matters so much. Many people focus exclusively on sleep duration, but consistency may be just as important. When you regularly sleep and wake at similar times, your brain becomes better at predicting what comes next. Predictability reduces friction. The system knows when to prepare for sleep. The system knows when to prepare for wakefulness. Everything becomes smoother. Imagine trying to manage a business where opening hours changed randomly every day. Employees would struggle. Schedules would become inefficient. Coordination would suffer. Your brain faces a similar challenge when sleep schedules become highly unpredictable. The more consistent the pattern, the easier it becomes for your internal systems to coordinate effectively. And coordination matters, because waking up is not a single event. It's a process. Your brain is gradually increasing alertness, increasing awareness, increasing responsiveness, preparing you to engage with the world again. When that process aligns with your natural rhythms, mornings often feel easier. When it doesn't, mornings can feel surprisingly difficult. This perspective can be liberating. Many people carry unnecessary guilt about their energy levels. They assume every low-energy morning is evidence of a character flaw. But biology plays a much larger role than most people realize. Your brain is not a machine that produces identical outputs regardless of conditions. It's a living system, and living systems depend on timing, recovery, rhythm, maintenance. Understanding that doesn't remove personal responsibility, but it does encourage a more intelligent approach. Instead of fighting your biology, you learn to work with it. Instead of assuming effort solves every problem, you recognize the importance of supporting the systems that generate effort in the first place. This brings us back to the central theme of this article. Your brain never stopped working during the night. It spent hours monitoring, organizing, regulating, protecting, and processing. By morning, the quality of that work influences how you feel. Some mornings are evidence that the process went well. Other mornings are evidence that the process was interrupted. Either way, the feeling you experience when you wake up is often the visible result of invisible work that occurred while you were asleep. And once you understand that, mornings become easier to interpret, not as random events, not as reflections of your worth, but as feedback from one of the most complex systems you'll ever interact with, your own brain. The surprising things your sleeping brain notices. By now, you've probably realized something important. Sleep is not a complete separation from the world. Your awareness changes. Your priorities change. Your brain shifts into different modes. But it never becomes completely disconnected. And one of the most interesting examples of this is what your brain continues noticing while you're asleep. Because the list is longer than most people expect. Many people imagine sleep as a state where all incoming information simply disappears. In reality, your brain continues evaluating far more information than you consciously experience. The key word is evaluating. Not everything reaches awareness. Not everything wakes you up. But information is still being processed. Think about what happens when you're awake in a crowded room. You aren't consciously paying attention to every conversation. You're not tracking every movement. You're not analyzing every sound. Your brain filters most of it automatically. Yet if someone suddenly says your name from across the room, your attention often shifts immediately. Something important broke through the filter. A similar process continues during sleep. The filter becomes stronger, much stronger, but it never becomes perfect. Certain kinds of information still have a greater chance of reaching your attention. And what those signals have in common is significance. Your brain cares less about volume than many people assume. A loud sound may wake you, but importance often matters more than intensity. This is why parents provide one of the most fascinating examples. A new parent may sleep through sounds that would seem impossible to ignore. Traffic, wind, rain, background noise. Yet a small cry from another room immediately grabs attention. The crying isn't necessarily louder. It's more relevant. Over time, the brain learns which signals deserve priority. And once that priority is established, the monitoring systems become remarkably sensitive to it. This principle appears throughout life. People who work night shifts often become sensitive to sounds related to their responsibilities. Pet owners may wake up when they hear unusual activity from an animal. Individuals caring for elderly family members often become highly responsive to specific sounds. The brain adapts to what matters, even during sleep. This reveals an important truth about attention. Attention is not only about awareness. Attention is about value. Your brain continuously asks, is this important enough to deserve resources? That question influences much of your experience, while awake, while asleep, and even while transitioning between the two. One of the most surprising things researchers have discovered is that the sleeping brain can sometimes distinguish between familiar and unfamiliar information. Not perfectly, not consciously, but enough to influence how it responds. Familiar sounds often receive less attention. Unexpected sounds receive more. Again, this reflects the brain's emphasis on significance. A familiar sound has already been categorized. The system understands it. An unfamiliar sound may represent new information. New information deserves investigation. The same logic applies to environmental changes. Imagine sleeping in a room where a fan runs continuously. At first, the sound may seem noticeable. Eventually, it fades into the background. Your brain learns that the sound is normal. Now imagine the fan suddenly stops. Many people wake up, not because a new sound appeared, because a familiar sound disappeared. The change itself became significant. This tells us something profound about the way the brain operates. The brain doesn't simply monitor events. It monitors patterns. And when patterns change unexpectedly, attention increases. This ability has enormous survival value. A predictable environment is usually safe. An unpredictable environment may require action. The sleeping brain remains sensitive to that possibility. What makes this even more interesting is that the same principle influences waking life. Humans naturally notice change. You notice when someone's behavior changes. You notice when routines change. You notice when expectations are violated. Your attention is drawn toward differences. The sleeping brain uses a similar strategy. It remains watchful for meaningful deviations from what is expected. This is one reason the phrase, "your brain stays alert while you sleep," can be misunderstood. People imagine constant vigilance, constant awareness, constant observation. But that's not really what's happening. Your brain isn't trying to monitor everything. That would be inefficient. Instead, it's trying to monitor what matters. The distinction is important, because effectiveness is not about paying attention to everything. It's about paying attention to the right things. This applies to far more than sleep. In modern life, many people struggle because they attempt to process too much. Too much information, too many opinions, too many notifications, too many inputs competing for limited attention. The brain becomes overloaded. Its filtering systems become strained. The result is often mental exhaustion. But the sleeping brain offers a useful lesson. Effective systems prioritize. They filter. They decide what deserves resources. They ignore what doesn't. The ability to focus depends just as much on what gets excluded as what gets included. Every night, your brain demonstrates this principle. Thousands of signals arrive. Most are ignored. A few receive attention. An even smaller number trigger action. The process is elegant because it balances protection with recovery. You stay asleep when sleep is more important. You wake up when awareness becomes more important. And most of the time, your brain makes those decisions without you ever realizing it. The next morning, you simply wake up and continue your day. You rarely notice the countless judgments your brain made throughout the night. The sounds it filtered, the patterns it monitored, the changes it evaluated, the signals it ignored. Yet all of that work was happening, quietly, efficiently, in the background, the same way so much of your mental life operates. And perhaps that's one of the most humbling realizations in this entire discussion. The conscious mind often likes to believe it's running everything. But many of the systems that protect, guide, and support you operate outside awareness. Sleep simply gives us a rare opportunity to see that reality more clearly. Because even while you're unconscious, your brain continues making decisions about what matters. And those decisions help keep you safe until morning. What happens if your brain can't do its night job? Up to this point, we've focused on what the brain does during sleep. But it's just as important to understand what happens when it doesn't get the chance to do that work properly. Because the effects are not always obvious at first. They rarely show up as dramatic failures. They show up as small changes that slowly accumulate. A little harder to focus. A little more irritability. a little less patience, a little more mental effort required for simple tasks. People often dismiss these changes because they don't feel severe in isolation. But your brain doesn't operate on single moments. It operates on accumulation. Sleep is one of the primary systems responsible for resetting that accumulation. When that system is disrupted, the effects don't disappear. They build. Think of it like a machine that relies on regular maintenance. If everything is working well, you don't think about it. The system runs smoothly in the background. But if maintenance is skipped repeatedly, small inefficiencies begin to appear. At first, they are easy to ignore. Slight delays, minor errors, reduced performance. Then over time, those small issues begin to compound. Eventually, the system stops operating at its intended level. The same principle applies to the brain. One night of poor sleep might not feel significant. You can usually compensate. You can push through. You can still function. But something subtle changes. Your emotional regulation becomes slightly weaker. Your attention becomes less stable. Your reactions become more impulsive. Your ability to think clearly becomes slightly reduced. You may not notice it directly, but others often do. Conversations feel a little more difficult. Decisions take a little longer. Frustration appears more quickly. Now extend that pattern across multiple nights. The effects stop being subtle. This is where many people begin to misunderstand what is happening. They assume they are simply becoming more stressed, more busy, more overwhelmed. But often, part of the explanation is simpler. The brain has not been given enough opportunity to fully reset. One of the most important functions of sleep is recovery of cognitive resources. Your brain uses a large amount of energy during waking hours. Every decision you make consumes resources. Every moment of attention has a cost. Every emotional response draws from the same system. Sleep helps restore that system. When restoration is incomplete, performance declines. Not all at once, gradually. And because the decline is gradual, adaptation happens quietly. You adjust to a lower baseline without realizing it. You start thinking that foggy mornings are normal. That constant tiredness is normal. That reduced focus is normal. But in many cases, it's not normal. It's a sign that the system responsible for recovery has not been fully supported. This is where sleep becomes less of a comfort issue and more of a performance issue. The brain is not simply resting at night. It is actively restoring the conditions required for effective thinking. When that restoration is incomplete, the quality of your mental processes changes. This affects everything. Decision-making becomes more reactive. Problem-solving becomes less flexible. Emotional responses become less regulated. Creativity becomes harder to access. Even motivation can feel lower, not because it disappears, but because the system supporting it is weakened. One of the most overlooked consequences is emotional stability. When you're well-rested, emotional experiences tend to feel more proportional. A stressful situation still feels stressful, but it doesn't overwhelm the entire system. When sleep is lacking, the same situation can feel significantly heavier, not because the situation changed, but because your capacity to process it changed. This is why people often regret reactions made when they are tired. The reaction wasn't random. It was a reduced version of their normal regulatory ability. Understanding this helps remove unnecessary self-judgment. You're not dealing with two different versions of yourself. You're dealing with one system operating under different levels of recovery. This also explains why sleep deprivation is so effective at degrading performance across almost every domain. It's not targeting one function. It's affecting the foundation that supports many functions. Attention, memory, emotion, decision-making. All of these rely on a properly restored system. When that foundation weakens, everything built on top becomes less stable. And the most concerning part is that people adapt to it without realizing. They normalize the decline. They adjust expectations downward. They assume their current level of functioning is simply who they are. But often, it's just what happens when the brain hasn't been allowed to complete its night job properly. This brings the entire discussion full circle. If sleep is where your brain monitors, organizes, repairs, and prepares, then disruption of sleep is not just a loss of rest. It's a loss of maintenance, a loss of clarity, a loss of stability, a loss of efficiency across systems that depend on each other. And once you see it that way, sleep stops being optional in any meaningful sense. Not because of discipline, not because of productivity rules, but because of how your brain is actually built to function. Every night, your mind depends on that period of uninterrupted recovery. And every day that follows depends on how well that process was completed, which means sleep is not something separate from your life. It is one of the processes that makes your life work. Conclusion: your brain never truly goes offline. If you look back at everything you've just explored, a single pattern becomes clear. Your brain does not stop working when you sleep. It doesn't shut down. It doesn't disconnect. It doesn't become inactive. It changes modes. That distinction is easy to miss, but it changes how you understand yourself. Because most people grow up with the assumption that sleep is the opposite of wakefulness. One is active, the other is empty. But what we've seen throughout this discussion is something very different. Sleep is active in a different direction. During the day, your brain is outward-facing. It deals with the world. It processes inputs in real time. It reacts, decides, focuses, and executes. At night, that direction shifts inward. The external world becomes less important. The internal world becomes the focus. The brain continues working, but the tasks change. Instead of responding to new information, it organizes existing information. Instead of producing action, it restores capacity. Instead of maintaining constant awareness, it filters and monitors selectively. Instead of pushing forward, it stabilizes and repairs. Nothing about this is random. It is a coordinated system designed to keep you functioning across time. And when you understand that, sleep stops being something you do at the end of the day. It becomes part of how you function across the entire day. What you experience in your waking hours is directly shaped by what your brain was able to accomplish during sleep. Clarity, focus, emotional stability, memory, decision-making, creativity, even your sense of self. All of these depend on processes that happen outside your awareness. This is where the idea of control becomes more nuanced. You are not consciously managing most of what keeps you alive and functioning, but you are living with the results of those systems every moment. And sleep is one of the primary ways those systems maintain themselves. This is why ignoring sleep doesn't just create tiredness. It creates a gradual shift in how effectively those systems operate. At first, the change is subtle. Then it becomes familiar. Then it becomes the new baseline, until you forget what full recovery actually feels like. But your brain doesn't forget. It continues trying to perform its nightly responsibilities regardless of whether you support it or not. Monitoring, filtering, organizing, repairing, stabilizing, preparing. Every night, it attempts to restore balance. And every morning, you experience the outcome of that effort. Some mornings reflect a system that had the time and conditions it needed. Other mornings reflect a system that didn't. Neither is random. Both are feedback. And once you see sleep through that lens, it becomes harder to treat it as optional or secondary. Because you're no longer looking at sleep as lost time. You're looking at it as the process that makes waking life possible. This doesn't make sleep mysterious or mystical. It makes it practical, almost mechanical in its consistency. If you support the system, it supports you. If you disrupt it, the effects show up elsewhere. Not immediately, but inevitably. And perhaps that's the most important realization in all of this. Your brain is always working on your behalf, even when you're not aware of it, even when you're not paying attention, even when you're asleep. It stays active. It stays responsive. It stays engaged with the task of keeping you functioning as a coherent, adaptive human being. You don't experience most of that work directly, but you experience its results every single day, which means sleep is not just something your brain goes through. It is one of the ways your brain takes care of you, quietly, consistently, without asking for recognition, and without ever truly turning off.